Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. This is Key Standard 9.5 for AP World. Calls for reform and responses. Rights based discourses challenged old assumptions about race, class, gender, and religion. Again, we already talked about the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which sought to protect the rights of children, women, and refugees. Refugees, in particular, because of the problems that came about during the Second World War and the inability of Jewish people to be able to flee the Nazi controlled areas. Next is global feminist movements. Feminism is a movement to achieve the equality of women in society. In the post war period after World War II, women sought to achieve rights on a global scale. The main goal seeks to put to an end the global patriarchy that has existed in much of the world throughout the time period from the Neolithic Revolution, the New Stone Age, to today. Next up is the Negritude movement. The Negritude movement was an African intellectual movement in retaliation to French colonial efforts. They encouraged the creation of a single understanding of an African identity for Black Africans worldwide. And then there's liberation theology, a Christian theological movement that broke out in Latin America that was hoping to help the oppressed. It began in the 1950s in the Catholic Church. In much of the world, access to education, as well as participation in new political and professional roles, became more inclusive in terms of race, class, gender, and religion. This includes the right to vote, suffrage, which was gained by women in the United States in 1920, Brazil in 1932, Turkey in 1934, Japan in 1945, India in 1947, and Morocco in 1963. In addition to gaining the right to vote, many of these areas also had the right to hold public office. The rising rate of female literacy and the increasing numbers of women in higher education in most parts of the world are an indication. Another example is the U.S. Civil Rights Act of 1964, which ended the discrimination based upon race in the United States, or at least made it illegal. And then in 1965, the Civil Rights Act that tried to guarantee the right to vote for African Americans. In South Africa, the apartheid regime came to an end between 1990 and 1903, and Nelson Mandela became the new leader of South Africa. Next is India and caste reservation. In the new Indian Constitution of 1947 through 1949, the system tried to make sure that there were seats in parliament reserved for especially the scheduled castes or the formerly untouchable peoples. Movements throughout the world protested the inequality of the environmental and economic consequences of global integration. These include Greenpeace, which is a non governmental organization, NGO, which tries to focus on global issues of climate change, deforestation, overfishing, commercial whaling, genetic engineering, and anti nuclear issues. And next up is Professor Wangari Maathai's Green Belt movement inside Kenya, an indigenous grassroots non governmental organization based in Nairobi, Kenya, that takes a holistic approach to development by focusing on environmental conservation, community development, and sustainable building. In 1968, a picture was taken by astronauts from the moon. It sparked a movement in 1970 to create what has been known as Earth Day. This year it will be on April 22nd, and it's a good reminder to try to protect our Earth. Uh, Oftentimes, people will make an effort on Earth Day to use less energy, to be less damaging on the environment, to turn the lights off. These guys are the ones who started to popularize the notion in the 1970s of reduce, reuse, recycle. And remember, they are important in that order. The number one most helpful thing you can do to protect the planet is to reduce the amount of, say, greenhouse gases you burn, or reduce the amount of meat that you eat, for instance. On April 22nd, it might be a good day to try to behave in such a way as we can protect the earth a little bit. One of the people that has been most prominent in being a voice against climate change and calling for reform, for instance, has been Greta Thunberg. Another organization has developed that's called the World Fair Trade Organization. It's an association of 401 organizations who are committed to improving the livelihoods of economically marginalized producers and to try to make sure that global trade is not only prosperous but also fair. I'll see you in the next video.